All right, and news just in. The Parliament signed off on an extension to the $100 billion JobKeeper scheme, meaning recipients will begin receiving a lower rate of JobKeeper at the end of the month. Let's bring in Political Editor Andrew Clennell, live from Canberra. Andrew, what's the latest? That's obviously passed through the Parliament. No amendments moved by Labor?
Well, Labor tried to move amendments, so one of the reasons it had to go to legislation as opposed to a stroke of the pen on lowering the rate and keeping it going was this IR provision, which allows the government to have employees reduce the hours without penalty for the company that employs them. Labor attempted to adjust that so that what's called legacy businesses, those who have a turnover which has gone down 10% instead of 30% and are coming off JobKeeper, would still have to pay their employees the JobKeeper rate of $600 a week. They were unsuccessful. Pauline Hanson, Sterling Griff supported the government. So the government has got through the legislation it originally put up. It's good news for Josh Frydenberg and Scott Morrison and Christian Porter, and it means that that tapers down now to $600 a week from $750 a week. And importantly for a number of businesses, Peter, it means that they can now reduce their employees' hours to keep going.
And hopefully for those that need to and can get back up on their feet, particularly those outside of Victoria, it means a bit more of a transition to normal. And we talk about this a lot, you know, a lot of businesses, regional areas and, as I said, outside of Victoria, who are desperate for their staff to come back to work, but it's a bit hard when many are paid more to stay home. I want to go to this speech today, a fairly rare public speech by the head of the Australian Signals Directorate, Rachel Noble. Now, in a former life, I was a senior advisor to a defence minister and I handled a lot of the issues around ASD. I don't know how much I can actually talk about those things publicly that they do, but what they do, their work is phenomenal. I think it's fantastic that she's been able to get out and make at least some of the points, the framework, the strategic framework for ASD public today, because I think the more we understand and value the work of the intelligence community is a good thing. What do you make of the speech, Andrew?
Well, I think it's a good point that you make, that these agencies seem to want to come out of the shadows a bit. We've seen Mike Burgess, the head of ASIO, formerly head of ASD, give a speech recently, and now Rachel Noble. And it might even be a response to this situation where Annika Smethurst, the journalist's home was raided after a story she did about ASD powers, that the security agencies have decided, well, we're better off getting out there and telling our narrative and how we're protecting Australians, rather than have aspersions cast on us about our motivations and so forth. So Rachel Noble very keen to point out there that she's not looking to surveil all Australians, that the legislation that's coming forward, what's being proposed, is giving more powers, some of which are already there, for the ASD to look at people who they believe are spies and or terrorists. So that was the spelling out, and you've got to, as a journalist, you've got to welcome these heads of agencies coming out and making their case publicly.
Yeah, look, I'll tell you what, in my time when I worked for the Defence Minister, I don't think many people outside of, you know, the immediate portfolios would have known the names of many of our spooks, senior spooks, intelligence heads, so I think it's a good thing, very good thing. I want to go to this whole super fight, a bit of a blast from the past there with Paul Keating. At least he's funny, Kevin Rudd. He hasn't improved in his time out of office, I have to say. Really going into the coalition government, trying very hard to ensure this 12% increase into super goes ahead. Now, as I said, I don't think Kevin Rudd helps anyone's argument in the media at all. Where's this headed? Because there's a growing push. It's not just the Liberal backbench now. We've heard the comments from the Minister. She was agnostic about the increase. We've heard comments from the Prime Minister. But you've got the RBA chief and others out there in the business community saying it's probably not the right time.
Well, I think Josh Frydenberg last couple of days, including on Sunday Agenda, did all but say this increase to 10% next year is not going ahead. I don't think it will go ahead. It might require legislation to ensure that occurs, but they got crossbench support on JobKeeper, so why not? And I think there's kind of valid arguments. Josh Frydenberg, he doesn't say we're aiming that it doesn't go ahead, but he starts listing all the people who support it not going ahead, being the RBA, the Grattan Institute, etc. And the simple argument is this is a pandemic, it's a rare situation, and it's a recession heading into depression if we're not careful. And employers need every lever they can to keep people in jobs. So in an ordinary environment, you could have an argument, look, this super change should go ahead, but these are rare circumstances, and it's a situation where if it saves employers some money, if it allows them to stay in business, if it allows them to employ people, delay it. And I think we'll be looking at a delay rather than a cancellation, Peter, but I think that's what the government's got in mind, definitely. And Keating, you know, he's the author of it, I guess. He promised LAW tax cuts. 1993, they weren't so LAW, were they, because they turned into this superannuation policy. But I think you said before, Keating, at least he's funny. He certainly spoke a lot better than Kevin Rudd, I thought.
I tell you, Kevin Rudd, as I said, he's a good ad for the Liberal Party every time he pops his head up. Trouble for Anthony Albanese today. It's forecast that Labor will have $15 million less at the next election than Bill Shorten had for the election that he lost. You would assume they're going to need more if they're going to win. You know, some are saying this is what happens when you lose consecutive elections like Labor do. I also, you know, having had experience trying to fundraise in opposition, I suspect there are donors who don't think that Labor can win the next election, and that's part of the reason why the money's being held back.
Yeah, there's no doubt they benefit, and Bill Shorten benefited from an expectation he was likely to win. But also the pandemic and the recession just hits hard. If businesses have any spare money at all, including big businesses, they're probably not going to direct them to political parties, and as you point out, to one who's only sort of a 30% chance of winning the election. So at least they've got public funding, but it is a big issue. I mean, we heard that the political parties were looking to put their staff on JobKeeper at one point, Peter, so they're all struggling. But clearly Labor's got a harder job than the Liberals at this point, and they will be struggling to fund the television ads they need come election time. Yeah, they'll always still have the union money though. Andrew Clennell, thanks for your time. True. Thank you.